He sacrificed his arm to save an alien girl, not realizing she was the princess. The station's hum was a constant presence, smooth, predictable, like the deep breath of a machine that had been running for years. But that calm shattered in an instant. A deafening screech of static filled the corridors, the kind of sound that made every engineer's spine stiffen. A cold dread settled over Yancy. He knew it before the announcement even came. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a simple malfunction. Catastrophic plasma breach, Sector 7. The station controller's voice crackled over the intercom, panicked and cracking. Zylth Imperial Embassy, fire and containment failure. Yancy's heart skipped. The Zylth, the most powerful species in the system. Their embassy on this station was more than just a building. It was a symbol, a hub of influence and political power, and it was burning. Without a second thought, he turned on his heel and sprinted down the hallway. The sound of his boots pounding against the metal floor was drowned out by the urgent hum of alarms. His mind was focused only on one thing: getting to the source of the breach. "Override station command," Yancy barked into his comms as he charged toward the emergency exit. "My team is hitting the hull. Full external containment. I'm going in for primary search. It's my system. No one knows it better than me. The Zylth's embassy is melting, and I'm not letting it take the station with it." He didn't wait for a response. No one would have the authority to stop him anyway. He had worked on the systems that powered this station, and he was going to be damned if he let some alien arrogance turn it all into ash. The Zylth sector was always a high-priority zone, opulent and heavily fortified. Their plasma conduits were built to last, but overconfidence had left them vulnerable to a failure of this magnitude. The Zylth loved their comforts, and Yancy knew that pride had probably led them to overlook the risks. He wasn't surprised. Reaching the fire-locked door that separated him from the Imperial section, he slammed his palm against the manual release. The door creaked open with a sharp screech, and a wall of blistering heat hit him. The air was thick with the pungent scent of vaporized metal, the kind of smell that made his suit's filters work overtime. Plasma fire wasn't like regular fire. It didn't just burn, it unmade. And it was everywhere. The walls of the corridor ahead were spiderwebbed with glowing orange cracks, as if the station itself had been wounded. Yancy's helmet display flashed warnings in rapid succession: radiation surge, structural integrity compromised. But he ignored them. This was his job. This was his system, and he wasn't going to let some firestorm wipe it all out. He moved forward, every step heavier than the last. He passed through the corridor, fighting against the thick, suffocating heat, his hands steady on the comms. He could feel the raw power of the plasma breach pulsing behind him, threatening to rip through the rest of the station. But his mind stayed focused, his eyes ahead. The Imperial quarters loomed up ahead. Usually the Zylth Royal Guard would stand at attention here, silent, watchful, efficient. But now the silence was chilling. The guards were slumped at their stations, their armor blackened and fused from the heat. They were dead. "Zylth Command, this is damage control," Yancy shouted into his comms. "I'm at the Imperial Concourse. The embassy guard is down. I repeat, the guard is down." No reply. The comms were fried. The station was being cut off, and the attack had been fast, precise. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't just a disaster. It was an assault. Yancy's chest tightened as he moved forward. His boots slapped against the floor in rhythm with his rising fear. Whatever was going on here, it was bad. He could feel it in the air, the heat, the smoke, the overwhelming sense of something larger than just a fire. Then from the thick smoke and crackling heat, a sound broke through, the sound of a child's cry. Yancy froze. A child. He'd been expecting destruction, death, chaos, but a child's cry. It made no sense. It wasn't possible. The Zylth didn't have children in places like this. The embassy was a fortress, not a daycare. His instincts kicked in. Without thinking, Yancy turned away from the main concourse and moved toward the sound. It was coming from the private imperial apartments. The heat intensified as he passed through the halls. The walls were melting in places, the surface dripping hot, liquid metal onto the deck. He forced himself to keep moving, one step at a time, pushing forward. The child's cries grew louder, more frantic. Yancy's pace quickened. He reached a small antechamber, its door half melted and jammed in place. He could barely make out the figure through the gap, a small Zylth child, her skin pale magenta, her bright cyan hair matted to her tear-streaked face. She was trapped behind the twisted bulkhead. "Stand back," Yancy shouted. "Get away from the door." The girl scrambled back, eyes wide with terror. Yancy's heart raced. She was pinned by the door. The maglock was sparking, sending bursts of plasma in all directions. His cutter would take too long. There was no time. Yancy didn't think. He acted. He slammed his right hand directly into the plasma arc, jamming it between the primary contacts. The pain hit him like nothing he'd ever felt. It wasn't fire. It was an explosion of white-hot needles ripping through his body, tearing apart nerves, bones, everything. His helmet display flashed red, right arm critical. He could feel the suit failing, the raw energy coursing through him, frying his flesh, his muscles, his very bones. With a scream of agony, Yancy pulled. He gripped the doorframe with his left hand, feeling it groan as it resisted his strength. With one final, desperate yank, the door tore free. The girl was free. But Yancy wasn't. His vision swam and he collapsed, the child still in his arms. He had no idea what he'd just done. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what kind of world he had just stepped into. But he had just changed the fate of the Zylth Empire. The fire on the station raged, and Yancy, along with the child in his arms, was now at the center of it all. The debt begins. Yancy woke up in darkness, disoriented, his body feeling like it had been dragged through a storm. His head spun as his senses slowly returned to him, his fingers tingling with a strange numbness. But there was something wrong. This wasn't the familiar, sterile environment of a station medbay. The air smelled unfamiliar, too clean, almost unnatural. A faint floral scent lingered, sharp and alien. He tried to sit up but found himself trapped, his body sinking into a soft, yielding surface that conformed to every curve of his form. The surface didn't feel like anything he had ever experienced on the station. It was unlike the cold, unforgiving metal of the Zylth station. This felt organic, living almost, as though it were breathing with him. Confusion clouded his thoughts. The last thing he remembered was the fire, the child, his arm burning, searing, the pain that had made everything go black. He glanced down at his body. His right arm was gone. In its place was a shimmering, gelatinous field that encased his entire right side. His skin, a patchwork of burned scars from the plasma fire, was still visible beneath the strange material. A soft hiss broke the silence. The door to the room slid open, and a figure entered. She moved with an eerie grace, her steps silent, almost predatory. Yancy's heart skipped a beat. Even disoriented and half-dazed, he recognized her immediately. Oliria, the Empress of the Zylth Dominion. Her appearance was even more striking in the soft violet light that filled the room. Gone were the regal robes and the golden tiara that marked her as royalty. Now she wore something simple, almost minimal, an elegant silver sheath that clung to her form, leaving her bare arms and throat exposed. Her cyan-blue hair, once bound in a perfect tiara, cascaded freely down her back. Without the weight of her crown, she seemed even more imposing, more dangerous. Yancy tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice nothing more than a ragged croak. Oliria, however, didn't wait for him to gather his thoughts. Her black eyes, as unreadable as the depths of space, scanned him without a trace of emotion. She didn't even seem concerned that he had just come from the flames of death. "You are awake," she said, her voice calm, almost clinical. "Good." Yancy tried to process her words, his mind struggling to connect the dots. Why am I here? The question rang in his head like a drumbeat. What was going on? Why wasn't he back on the station? Oliria didn't offer him an explanation immediately. Instead, she circled around him, her gaze fixed, studying him like he was a specimen. He felt a chill crawl down his spine. He was no longer in control, no longer the one pulling the strings. He was at her mercy. "Where am I?" he managed to croak. "My flagship," Oliria replied, her voice still devoid of any warmth. "The ascendancy." Her words didn't make sense at first. His mind was too muddled, his body too weak. He blinked, trying to make sense of the situation. Flagship, ascendancy. None of this felt right. His thoughts raced as he tried to piece it all together. His mind flicked to the explosion, the fire, the destruction he had witnessed. The child, the one he had saved. She was the key to this entire nightmare. The child he had pulled from the fire was none other than the Empress's daughter. Oliria paused before him, her eyes unwavering as she studied him. The faintest of smirks tugged at her lips, but it wasn't a smile. It was more like a calculation, a judgment. "You have no need for your station," Oliria continued, her tone almost detached. "Your human administrators have been informed. Your recovery was deemed best handled by my people." His brain caught up to her words and his pulse quickened. He wasn't on a Zylth station anymore. He wasn't just a chief engineer fighting to save an embassy. He had crossed some invisible line, and now, it seemed, he was trapped in a new world, a world where his every move would be watched by the cold, calculating eyes of the Zylth Empress. But there was more. Yancy shifted, trying to get his bearings. "I want my arm back," he growled, his voice still rough. "I want to go home." Oliria tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as if she were considering the depth of his request. There was no sympathy in her gaze, just cold calculation. "Your arm is gone," she said almost dismissively. "Vaporized, and you have no home." His breath caught in his throat. Her words hit harder than the pain from his injuries. He had saved the child, but at what cost? The Empress had not only taken his arm, but now had control over his very life. "You are bound to me now, Chief Engineer," Oliria continued, her voice dropping to an almost whisper. "The calor is absolute. It is a life debt. Your life is mine now." Yancy's mind spun. The calor. He had heard of it in passing, a concept of life debt among the Zylth, but it had always seemed distant, something that didn't touch his world. Now it was a reality, and it was binding him to this alien empress, whether he liked it or not. The room felt smaller, the weight of Oliria's presence pressing down on him. She was the ruler of an empire, a cold, unyielding power who commanded more than just armies. She controlled the lives of countless beings. And now, because of his own actions, he was part of that system. "You saved my daughter," she said, stepping closer, her voice softer now, though still tinged with the same icy authority. "You did what no one else could do. You made a choice, and now you belong to me." Yancy's head buzzed as he processed her words. The debt, the calor, the power she had over him now. His instincts screamed for him to fight, to break free of the invisible chains she was forging around him, but his body was weak. And even worse, his mind couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into a much larger game than he had ever realized. "You may not want this," Oliria said, her voice cold once again. "But it is done. You are my responsibility now, Yancy." He could see it in her eyes, the unspoken truth. There was no escaping this now. The moment he had saved the child, he had sealed his fate. The life debt wasn't just a Zylth tradition. It was a cage, and he was its prisoner. Yancy clenched his jaw. He was an engineer. He solved problems, fixed things. But this was a problem that didn't have an easy fix. He had just become a pawn in a game that was far bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Oliria stepped back, her gaze lingering on him with the same cool intensity. "Rest. Your healing is still in process. You have much to learn, Chief Engineer, But remember this, you belong to me now. Your life is mine whether you like it or not." As she turned to leave, the door sliding open behind her, Yancy was left alone with the weight of her words. The universe had just shifted under his feet. He had saved a child, but now he had to survive the consequences. And he had no idea what that would mean yet. The unseen chains. The first few days in the Empress's care were a blur of sterile lights and strange, invasive procedures. Yancy woke up each time feeling as though he were sinking deeper into some alien world. The pain from his burns never fully went away, but there was something else, a strange pressure on his chest, like a weight he couldn't escape. Every time he tried to push against it, it only seemed to grow heavier. Oliria never stayed long. She came and went with the silence of someone used to ruling entire empires, her movements so smooth and precise they felt like the execution of some ancient ritual. When she did speak to him, her words were measured, as if every syllable had been carefully considered before it left her lips. There was no warmth, no comfort, just a chilling, distant command. Yancy hated it. He hated that his life was now in her hands, that he had become nothing more than a tool in her vast, cold machine. But there was no choice. The calor, that damn life debt, had bound him to her. There was no escape. Days blurred into each other. He was weak, still healing from the injuries that had nearly killed him, but there was a strange sense of unease building inside him. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting. His new prosthetic arm, gleaming silver and magenta, felt foreign, unnatural. The alien tech in it hummed faintly, a constant reminder that he wasn't human anymore. Not fully. Oliria had promised that he would be healed, that her technology would restore what had been lost. And while the physical wounds on his body were slowly fatting, the deeper, more invisible wounds lingered. He had lost more than just an arm. He had lost his freedom. One afternoon, a week after he had first woken up aboard the Ascendancy, Yancy found himself standing near the viewport of his quarters, looking out into the vast emptiness of space. His eyes were drawn to the Zylth flagship, hovering like a dark monolith in the cold void. Its sleek curves and shimmering hull were designed for one purpose, to command. And right now, it was his prison. The door to his quarters slid open without warning, the faint hiss of the seal breaking the quiet. Yancy didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "I see you're still standing," Oliria's voice came, smooth and detached as always. Yancy didn't respond immediately. He just stood there staring out at the stars. The vastness of space felt oppressive now. It wasn't the same sense of awe he had felt when he first set foot in the station. Now it just felt empty, isolated. He was a prisoner, and every star out there was a reminder of how far from home he truly was. Oliria walked into the room, her footsteps light, the swish of her silver sheath brushing against the floor. She stopped a few feet behind him, her gaze following his toward the endless stretch of space. "I've been thinking about the life debt," Yancy said finally, his voice low, "and what it means." Oliria didn't reply immediately. Instead, she moved closer, her presence a weight behind him. He could feel her studying him, as she always did, as if she were trying to figure out what made him tick. "You do understand, don't you?" she asked, her voice almost curious. "The calor is not just a tradition. It is a law that binds you to me. Your life is mine now, whether you wish it or not." Yancy's jaw clenched. He had heard her say it enough times by now. He didn't need the reminder, but the truth of it, the weight of it, still sat heavily in his chest. "I get it," he muttered, turning to face her, his eyes hard. "You think you own me now. You think that because you saved me, because I saved your daughter, I'm yours to command." Her eyes met his, their black depths unreadable. She didn't flinch, she never flinched. "I don't think," Oliria replied, her tone flat, almost bored. "I know." Yancy's fist clenched, the cool metal of his prosthetic hand biting into his skin. "Well, you're wrong." Oliria tilted her head, her gaze sharpening. "Am I?" she asked softly. "You may not want to believe it, but it's the truth. You are mine, Yancy. Your life, your future, everything is tied to me now." The words stung more than they should have. Yancy had never been good at surrendering control. He was an engineer, a fixer, a man who solved problems with his hands and his mind. But this was something he couldn't fix. He could feel the tension building between them, thick and suffocating. Oliria had a way of making everything feel like a command, even when she wasn't saying anything. She was the ruler of an empire, an entire galaxy, while he was nothing more than a broken man with no future, no place to go. And yet, something in him refused to accept it. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice strained as he stepped back, his eyes locking with hers. "I didn't ask to be part of your games, your politics. I didn't sign up for this life debt crap." Oliria didn't flinch, her expression didn't change. She was a statue, a cold monument to power and control. "You may not have asked for it, Yancy," she said, her voice icy, "but you have it, and now you must live with it." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, and then she turned, walking toward the door. Before she left, she paused, her back to him. "You will learn in time," she said, her voice quiet but filled with certainty. "The Calor is not just a burden, it is a gift, and you will find that you cannot escape it no matter how hard you try." The door slid shut behind her, leaving Yancy alone in the dim room, staring at the endless stars. The weight of her words settled on him like a physical force. She was right. There was no escape. The life debt had bound him to her, and no matter how much he fought it, no matter how much he resented it, he was hers now. But as the days passed, something in him began to change. He wasn't just a tool for the Empress to use. He wasn't just a prisoner in a gilded cage. There had to be more to this, more than just obedience, more than just survival. If he had to be bound to her, then he would find a way to use this life debt to his advantage. And he would make sure Oliria knew that she hadn't tamed him. Not yet. The game of shadows. The ship was silent as Yancy paced the cold, polished floors of his quarters, the sound of his boots muted by the thick, almost oppressive atmosphere. The Ascendancy was unlike any place he'd ever known. It was a floating fortress, a palace in space, where the weight of every decision could change the fate of entire star systems. And yet, despite its grandeur, it felt more like a tomb. Oliria had made it clear, he was bound to her now. His life, his future, everything he had known belonged to her, wrapped up in a debt he hadn't asked for. The Calor. It was the law. And yet, despite the weight of that unspoken promise, the presence of the Empress herself, there was something deeper at work here, something that felt wrong. Yancy couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, even when she wasn't around. The halls of the Ascendancy were too quiet, too still. The Zylth knew how to keep secrets, but Yancy had learned something in his years as an engineer. When something felt off, it usually was. He wasn't alone in his isolation. The tension in the air had been growing since his arrival. The Zylth royal court, the same court that revered Oliria as a goddess, resented his presence. A human, a foreigner in their midst. Worse still, the fact that he was the Empress's Calor, her bound servant, her debt-bound protector, had made him the subject of whispered conversations behind closed doors. It was no secret that the Zylth had always been a race of supreme logic, their every decision calculated and precise. But now, with Yancy under their roof, their perfectly ordered world was beginning to show cracks. And those cracks, Yancy knew, would eventually expose the chaos that lay beneath. It was early one morning, if time could even be measured that way on the Ascendancy, when the shadow fell. Yancy had just finished his breakfast, a strange but familiar dish of alien fruits and some kind of protein paste, when a soft chime echoed from the door. Yancy tensed, but he didn't move. He was used to the soft, polite intrusions that seemed to punctuate his days here. The Zylth didn't knock, they didn't need to. But this time the door didn't open automatically. Instead, it waited as if expecting something. He stood and walked over to it, his right hand brushing against the smooth surface of the door as it hissed open. He was greeted by the familiar presence of Varixos, the captain of the Empress's royal guard. His tall figure stood like a statue, his midnight blue armor gleaming even under the soft light. His eyes were cold, calculating. But there was something different in them this time, something sharp, something dangerous. Lord Consort, Varixos greeted him, his voice low and uninviting. The Empress requests your presence. Yancy stiffened at the title, Lord Consort. It was the name they had given him. It was meant to remind him of his place. But the title felt like an insult, a reminder that no matter how far his mind roamed, he was still bound to Oliria, her calor, her responsibility. But the way Varixos said it now, it felt more like a challenge. There was no respect in his voice. It was an order, one he had no choice but to follow. "What's this about?" Yancy asked, his voice flat. Varixos didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, motioning for Yancy to follow him down the long, curved corridor. The air felt colder as they walked. The walls seemed to press in closer with each step, the weight of the silence suffocating. Yancy's mind raced. This wasn't a typical summon. Oliria wasn't the kind of ruler who needed to be bothered with trivialities. If she had called for him, it meant something important, something dangerous. They reached the center of the ship, where the heart of the Zylth government sat. The command deck of the Ascendancy, a vast room dominated by shimmering, organic-like technology that hummed with an alien intelligence. The lights flickered as they approached the central platform, where Oliria stood, alone, facing a large, holoscreen map of the galaxy. "Ah, Yancy," she said, her voice calm but layered with a hidden tension. "I'm glad you're here. I have a task for you." Yancy's heart skipped. A task? What could she possibly want from him now? He was just a tool bound by a debt, and yet here he was, summoned for something important. Oliria turned slowly, her dark eyes piercing through him. Her regal robes shimmered in the low light, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the command deck. But there was something in her expression, something beneath the surface that Yancy hadn't seen before. For the first time, she seemed unsure. "I'm listening," Yancy said, keeping his tone neutral even though his mind was racing. Oliria's eyes flickered, a shadow of doubt crossing her face, but it was gone before Yancy could fully grasp it. "There's a threat to the Empire," she began. Her voice dropped, becoming softer, more dangerous. "One within my own ranks." The words sent a jolt through Yancy. He had suspected as much. The tension in the court had been palpable, like a storm waiting to break. The Zylth, with all their logic and power, were not as untouchable as they thought. There were cracks, deep ones. "Who?" Yancy asked, his voice steady. Oliria took a slow step forward, her black eyes never leaving his. "Varixos," she said softly, her words like a knife. Yancy's heart stopped. The captain of her guard, the man who had watched over her for years, the one who had always been at her side. "You think he's a traitor?" Yancy asked, his voice sharp, disbelief creeping in. Oliria's eyes darkened. "I know he is. And you, Yancy, you are the only one I trust to handle this. You've seen the cracks in the system. Now it's time to expose them." Yancy felt his stomach drop. This was more than just political games. It was personal. The Zylth were always so precise, so calculated. But this was a war within the walls. The very heart of the Empire was under threat. "You want me to take him down?" Yancy asked. Oliria nodded slowly. "You're the only one who can. You've been close to him, and I believe you understand how he thinks." Yancy's mind was racing. This was no longer just about survival. It was about power, about the future of the Zylth Empire and his place in it. But one thing was clear. The game had just begun, and Yancy was no longer just a pawn. He was about to become a player. The shifting shadows, the tension in the air was thick, like the quiet before a storm. Yancy had always been able to sense when something was off, years of working on complicated systems, diagnosing problems no one else could, had given him an instinct for detecting disruptions. And now, on the ascendancy, that same instinct was on high alert. The Empire was a machine, but like all machines, it had its weaknesses. Yancy could feel them, hidden beneath the smooth surface of Oliria's calculated control. He had expected things to settle down after the initial chaos. After all, he had saved her daughter. He had been given a new life, one that came with the weight of the Calor, the life debt that bound him to Oliria. But the closer he got to the heart of the Zylth Empire, the more he realized just how fragile everything really was. And now, with Varixos's betrayal hanging in the air, it felt like the Empire was teetering on the edge of something far worse than a simple political game. Yancy was no longer just Oliria's prisoner. He wasn't just her Calor. He had become something else, a weapon, a tool in a much larger game. But for the first time since he had arrived on the ascendancy, he was beginning to understand just how deep the darkness went. It was late, or at least Yancy assumed it was. Time didn't seem to matter much on the flagship. The lighting was soft, almost hypnotic, and the windows of his quarters overlooked the vast, glittering expanse of space. From here, he could see the stars stretching out in every direction, cold and endless. But even the beauty of the view couldn't erase the feeling of being trapped. The door hissed open, breaking the silence. Yancy didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He'd come to recognize the soft, deliberate footsteps of Oliria. She entered without a word, her presence filling the room as if it were designed to consume everything. Her cold, calculating gaze swept over him, taking in his appearance, noting every detail, every shift in his posture. She had a way of making him feel like nothing more than an object to be analyzed, dissected. But tonight there was something different in her eyes, something unreadable. "Yancy," she said finally, her voice low, almost like a whisper, though it carried the full weight of authority. "You've been quiet lately." Yancy didn't respond right away. His eyes remained fixed on the stars, his thoughts swirling. Oliria had always been careful with her words, but now he could feel the weight behind her statement. The way she said his name, it wasn't a simple address but a command, a challenge. She was watching him, waiting for something. "Quiet," he repeated, his voice flat. "I've been thinking." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "About what?" He hesitated. "About you, about your empire, about the game you're playing." The words hung in the air, but Oliria didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her movements fluid, almost predatory. "You think I'm playing games?" she asked, her voice cool but with a hint of something darker beneath the surface. "You think you understand what's at stake here?" Yancy turned to face her, finally meeting her gaze. The distance between them felt electric, as though every word and every gesture carried the weight of something far larger than the two of them. "You're playing a game of survival," he said quietly, his words sharp yet calm. "But it's not just about power anymore, is it? You're holding on to something, something that's slipping away." Oliria's expression remained unchanged, but there was a flicker in her eyes. It was brief, but Yancy caught it. Doubt, regret. He couldn't tell, but he knew it was there. "You speak as though you know everything about me," she said, her tone icy now. "You are nothing more than a human in my court, Yancy. Your perspective is limited." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His prosthetic arm, once a symbol of his loss, now felt like a weight, a reminder of how far he had come and how far he still had to go. "No," he said firmly, his voice low. "I don't know everything about you, but I do know one thing: you're not in control anymore. You think you are, but you're not." Oliria's eyes flashed with something, anger, surprise. He couldn't tell, but whatever it was, it only deepened the tension between them. "You speak of control," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper, "as though I ever lost it." Yancy didn't back down. "You're losing it, Oliria. You're losing the empire, the court, and your grip on everything, and you don't even realize it." Her expression darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. For the first time since he had met her, Yancy saw a flicker of vulnerability. It was fleeting, but it was there. You think I don't know what's happening? Oliria's voice was hard now, her words a threat. I know exactly what's happening, but this is how it has to be. This is the price of leadership. Yancy took another step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. No, it's the price of arrogance. The words hung in the air, and for a moment neither of them moved. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Oliria's gaze didn't waver, but something in her posture shifted. She wasn't the perfect, untouchable ruler anymore. She was a woman on the edge. I saved your life, Oliria said suddenly, her voice soft but edged with something sharp. You owe me everything. I gave you a chance to survive, to live, and you dare to question me. Yancy felt the weight of her words, but he didn't flinch. He had nothing left to lose. You didn't give me anything, he replied. You took it, and now you've trapped me in this, trapped yourself too. Her eyes darkened, but there was no anger in them, only cold, controlled fury. She was the Empress of the Zylth. She could kill him with a single command, but instead she just stood there, watching him, waiting. I'm not afraid of you, Yancy said quietly, his voice low but certain. You don't control me, not anymore. For the first time, Oliria's perfect composure cracked. Her eyes flickered with something deeper, something hidden. She didn't say a word, but in that moment, Yancy knew things had changed. The game was no longer hers alone. And Yancy wasn't just a player anymore. He was a threat. Part 6, The Catalyst. Yancy had been walking the halls of the Ascendancy for hours, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. The smooth, glassy floors reflected his every step, and the cold silence of the flagship made his thoughts echo in his skull. The grandeur of the ship, the hum of its systems, the occasional murmur of the Zylth courtiers, all felt hollow now. Every corner he turned seemed to mock him with its beauty, its perfection. But beneath the surface something was shifting. He could feel it. The Empire was on the verge of something, but what? That nagging uncertainty, that crawling itch of danger gnawed at him. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was a witness, and the more he saw, the less he liked what he was beginning to understand. It wasn't the first time he'd been summoned by Oliria in the last few days. She had kept him close, always watching, always directing him from the shadows. He had become her tool, not just in the political games she played, but in the dark, unspeakable corners of her own empire. Yancy wasn't blind. He could see that the cracks were deeper than just Varixos's betrayal. There was something more at play here, something that Oliria hadn't fully revealed, and something that made him feel more like a pawn than a player. But today it felt different. The summons wasn't just a formal request. The urgency in the message was palpable, even through the cold digital relay. You need to come to the command deck. Now. The air around him seemed to grow heavier as he made his way down the hall toward the central command area. The doors slid open with their usual hiss, but this time it felt like stepping into a trap. The lights flickered overhead, and the atmosphere was thick with tension. Inside, Oliria stood at the center of the room, her back to him. The map of the galaxy, a glowing network of connections and grids, filled the room. But instead of the usual calm efficiency, there was a raw, frenzied energy in the air. Even the ship's hum seemed off, like the heartbeat of something on the verge of collapse. "Oliria?" Yancy asked, his voice cutting through the silence. He couldn't hide the sense of unease in his chest. Something was about to snap, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. She turned, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes were different. They were wide, burning with something that felt almost desperate. "There's been a shift," Oliria said, her voice low, almost unrecognizable. "Varixos was just the beginning." Yancy stepped forward, his senses tingling with alertness. "What do you mean?" Oliria gestured toward the holographic map. It had always been a thing of beauty, the interconnected lines of Zylth space glowing with vibrant color. But now, the map was riddled with deep red marks, alerts, messages, signals. Something had triggered them all. It's not just Varixos, Oliria said, her voice strained. There's a faction within the Empire, a group of high-ranking officers, noble families, those who see my rule as compromised. Yancy frowned, stepping closer. Compromised by what? By you, she said, the words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. By me. Her eyes flashed with a bitter kind of realization. By the fact that I've kept you here, alive, and that I've bound myself to you. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. For all the power she wielded, for all her unshakable control over the Zylth Dominion, Oliria had just admitted something he had suspected but never fully understood. She was vulnerable, and the more she kept him around, the more her enemies saw her as weak. You know that the Calor isn't just a debt, Oliria continued, her voice barely a whisper. It's a symbol, a mark of weakness. To them, it's proof that I'm not fit to rule, that I've allowed a primitive to influence my decisions, that I've placed my trust in someone outside of my own people. Yancy stared at her, his mind racing. It wasn't just political. This was about the very core of her power, and he had become a weapon in a game of survival she hadn't fully prepared for. So what now? Yancy asked, his voice low, though he already knew the answer. This wasn't a simple matter of saving the Empire. This was about saving her and her Empire's very foundation. Oliria's gaze hardened. We move first. We strike before they can overthrow me. Her words were chilling. There was no hesitation, no doubt in her voice. She had made a decision. She was going to fight no matter the cost. Who do we fight? Yancy asked, knowing that everything in this moment hinged on his next move. All of them, she replied, her eyes flashing with the cold, unrelenting fury he had seen from her in the past. They think they can tear me down, but they don't understand what it takes to rule this empire. They don't understand what it takes to survive. They will learn. Yancy felt a surge of adrenaline pulse through him, his mind already calculating the steps ahead. And I'm part of this plan. You need me to help you take them down. Oliria nodded, her expression unwavering. You've always been part of the plan, Yancy. You just didn't know it. The room felt colder now, as though the walls had closed in on him. He had come to realize that this wasn't just a political struggle. It was a battle for survival, not just for Oliria's throne, but for the very soul of the Zylth Dominion. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined, and he was in the middle of it all. His prosthetic arm, once a symbol of his sacrifice, felt heavier now, as though it was no longer just a tool but a burden, a reminder that everything had changed. Where do we start? Yancy asked, his voice steady, his mind already focused. Oliria stepped closer, her eyes burning with purpose. We make them see what happens when you try to take a Zylth queen down. They will understand the cost of underestimating me. And with those words, Yancy knew they were no longer just playing a game. This was war, a war within the Empire, and he had just become her most dangerous ally. As the holoscreen flickered with new red marks, Yancy's mind turned over the endless possibilities of what could happen next. The balance of power had shifted. The stakes had grown far beyond political maneuvering. There was no turning back now. The price of truth. The tension had been building for days, the undercurrents of betrayal, power, and hidden agendas converging like a storm on the horizon. Yancy could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, each passing day stretching him thinner between his loyalty to his own survival and the undeniable truth that Oliria, for all her cold logic and brutal authority, had become an unpredictable force in his life. He had spent the last few days locked away in his quarters, the silent weight of the Empress's presence still haunting every corner of the ship. The Ascendancy, once a marvel of sleek design and imposing strength, now felt like a gilded cage, its walls closing in on him. The Zylth Empire, once so secure in its power, was on the verge of cracking wide open. And Yancy, now more than just her prisoner, had begun to question whether he was part of the solution, or the spark that would set it all ablaze. The door to his quarters hissed open, and this time it was Varixo's nor any of the guards. It was Oliria herself. She was wearing her regal robes again, gold and white, a stark contrast to the stark metallic tones of the flagship. The tiara sat firmly on her head, the symbol of her unquestioned authority. Yet today, something about her presence seemed different. Her movements were purposeful, but there was a softness to her that Yancy hadn't noticed before. The Empress of the Zylth was rarely unguarded, but in this moment something had cracked. Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now filled with a quiet intensity. Yancy stood up instinctively, but he didn't move closer. He watched her, uncertain of what game she was playing now. "You've been quiet," Oliria said, her voice unusually soft. "You have something to say." Yancy tilted his head slightly. She was not the same woman who had ruled the halls of the Ascendancy with such ironclad control. The cracks were starting to show, and he could see it. She was more vulnerable than she had ever been in front of him. Maybe the weight of everything, the empire, the secrets, the lies, was starting to catch up with her. He could feel the truth in his chest, heavy and undeniable. "I've been thinking a lot about you, Oliria," he said, his voice steady, though the words were a risk. She raised an eyebrow, and for a brief moment the air between them shifted. "And what have you concluded?" Her gaze was piercing, as if she were daring him to continue. Yancy exhaled, his thoughts running fast. "That you're not as untouchable as you think you are. That your empire is not as unbreakable as you believe." Her expression remained impassive, but the faintest flicker of something passed through her eyes. "You speak of things you don't understand," she replied, her voice dangerously low. Yancy stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Maybe I don't, but I know this: everything you've built is on the edge of falling apart, and you're not as in control as you think you are. The cracks are showing, Oliria. You can feel it too." For a moment she said nothing, her eyes studying him as if weighing his words. The silence stretched between them, thick and unyielding. Then slowly she spoke, her voice softer now, almost weary. "You think you know me. You think you know my empire. But what you don't understand is this: I have sacrificed everything for it, for them, for my people." Yancy's mind raced. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice rough. "What have you sacrificed for yourself? You're not just an empress, Oliria. You're a woman trapped in a cage of your own making, a cage built of lies, betrayal, and power, and it's suffocating you." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. He could see her flinch, just the slightest twitch of her features, but it was enough. She was human, after all. She wasn't the perfect, untouchable ruler she projected. And he had just shattered the illusion she had built for so long. "I don't need your pity, Yancy," Oliria said sharply, her tone returning to its usual icy coldness. But there was something else in her eyes now, a flicker of doubt. She turned away from him, staring out the viewport at the endless stretch of stars. Yancy moved closer, his words softer now. "I'm not pitying you. I'm trying to help you see what you've built for yourself. I'm trying to help you see the truth." She didn't respond at first. For a long moment she stood there, her gaze fixed on the cold, infinite expanse outside. The silence was deafening, but Yancy didn't back down. He wasn't going to let her hide from the truth anymore. Finally, Oliria spoke again, her voice quieter, almost sad. "I didn't ask for this life. I didn't ask to be a ruler, to carry the weight of an entire empire on my shoulders, but I have no choice. No one does." Yancy took a deep breath. "You're wrong. You always have a choice, Oliria, and right now you're standing on the edge of that choice. You can keep playing this game, pretending that your empire is perfect, or you can let go of the control and rebuild something real, something human." Her eyes locked with his, the weight of everything between them finally sinking in. She could have crushed him in an instant, could have turned him into dust with a single command. But she didn't. She stood there, facing the truth for the first time. "I don't know how," she whispered. "I've forgotten how to." Yancy stepped forward, closer than he had ever dared. "Then let me help you." For the first time in their strange, turbulent relationship, Oliria didn't resist. She didn't pull away. She simply stood there, her posture softer than it had ever been, her mask slipping just enough for Yancy to see the woman behind the Empress. The cracks were deep, but in that moment he saw the possibility of something more, something beyond the politics, beyond the debt. "You don't owe me anything anymore," Yancy said, his voice steady. "The collar is a chain, but you don't have to wear it forever." Oliria met his gaze, and for the briefest of moments there was no empire, no ruler, no prisoner. There was just two people standing at the crossroads of something neither of them fully understood. "Maybe you're right," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Maybe it's time to let go." And in that moment, the future of the Zylth Empire and their relationship was no longer just about survival. It was about choosing what kind of world they wanted to build from the ashes. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.